Jeff Cooper always said you can't defeat evil by running away from it.
Jeff believed deeply that it was not just your right, but it was your responsibility to be able to protect yourself, your family.
He's got a political science degree from Stanford and from University of California, a degree in history, I think a master's, and he has taught history. He's sort of a philosopher too.
Well, Jeff Cooper didn't suffer fools gladly, and I think he saw political correctness as a disease in our society that was causing great damage.
He was crystal clear in his honesty. He was a man who stood where he is.
Well, I learned more from him than I did from any of my teachers in school, that's for sure.
Jeff Cooper was a pain in the ass sometimes.
In the beautiful and rugged countryside near Prescott, Arizona, is a school as unique and fascinating as the man who started it. Gunsight is an academy unlike any other educational institution that teaches people in the precisely chosen words of its sharp and colorful founder to most effectively employ a handgun in the purpose for which it was intended. In other words, how to stop or kill an armed aggressor. Established in 1976, this was the first private school of its type in operation since the pre-Civil War dueling academies of the Old South. The school's founder was former Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel John Dean Jeff Cooper.
Gunsight to Cooper was like Disneyland was to Walt Disney. I mean, this was his ideal world, and he made it happen.
A respected World War II combat officer, history teacher, philosopher, noted writer, big game hunter, devoted husband and father, enthusiastic gourmet cook, and all-around devotee of all things aesthetically pleasing. What Cooper will be best known for is his creation and implementation of what has become known worldwide as the modern technique of the pistol. His students have ranged from numerous SWAT officers and Special Forces members to private citizens who must present proof of their good character and honest intentions.
Jeff's contributions are, quite honestly, somewhat incalculable. There's no way of knowing how many people he saved. I would have ventured to say it's probably in the thousands. I know myself, I've used it on 5 separate occasions. I've taught hundreds of people that have been involved in gunfights. These are principles that I learned from Jeff.
In the history of modern firearms training, no name is better known than Jeff Cooper. Starting in 1957, Cooper experimented with, observed, and finally codified and refined the most successful system for safely and effectively using a handgun defensively.
It wasn't until the turn of the century that individuals such as Elmer Keith, Bill Jordan, really started to publish material on what it took to be a gunfighter. How did you handle your weapon? How did you shoot? How did you train for the eventuality of a gunfight?
Everyone who teaches somebody at any police academy, at any place, anybody who's learning how to shoot a pistol is going to learn the Jeff Cooper method. And it's his method. It didn't exist before he was here.
And I must sound terribly, shall we say, conceited, because I did invent the training systems which are now more or less worldwide. And the reason they worked, the reason they are adopted, because they're right. And that's a terrible thing to say, you know, I'm right because I'm right. But that's the reason they adopted them, because they saw that they worked.
But the sum total of Jeff Cooper as a man went far beyond his knowledge and teaching on firearms and self-defense. From combat Marine Corps officer in World War II, to enthusiastic amateur race car driver, African big game hunter, to history instructor and prolific writer, Jeff Cooper always lived his life to the fullest.
We have been granted a short time on Earth in which to appreciate the great things. The fact that you cheer the act in which you're participating is zest. And that can be all sorts of things, from motor racing to mountaineering to lovemaking. The worst thing that can happen to you is failure to appreciate what God has made available to you. and zest makes that possible.
Jeff Cooper was born and reared in a comfortable household in the old Los Angeles of movie stars, rolling hills, and orange groves. His father, Jack, was a philosophically and intellectually inclined banker and land developer who strived to bring out the best in his naturally inquisitive youngest son.
Southern California, in the period between World War I and World War II, it was simply paradise. But there was not this feeling of compression. And besides which, we didn't have a social problem. Everybody was on the same team.
And guns were a natural part of everyone's life.
If you were a little kid, you would ask your other little kid, "Where are your father's guns? Let's go see your father's guns." And of course, always under proper supervision and always safe handling. But you'd go say, "Well, this is my father's deer gun and this is my father's shotgun." But the idea that he didn't have a gun never came up.
By the time Jeff entered Los Angeles High School in the early 1930s, he had become fascinated not only with guns, but with the military. Entering Stanford University in 1937, he majored in political science and continued his interest in military affairs through college ROTC.
Nothing could be less scientific than politics, but it was considered to be easy, and I was really not terribly interested in the school. I got a B average out of college, but that was mainly because I liked the military subjects.
While attending Stanford, he would meet someone who would become the most important person in his life, a lovely fellow Angelino, Janelle Marks.
I suppose I used to say I spent most of my time chasing Janelle and going hunting.
He chose a beautiful woman to marry. Well, I know an awful lot of people who read Jeff Cooper and think of him as a fire-breathing defender of Second Amendment rights. They really were a cute couple, and it was very sweet to watch them together.
We always got along very well right from the beginning because he is a very enthusiastic person. He seemed interested in what I had to say, and I found him fascinating. We had lots to talk about always. I don't think there was ever a lull in the conversation in the many we've had over 60 years.
At the time Jeff graduated from Stanford, the Marine Corps was offering top ROTC candidates officers' commissions. Anticipating America's entrance into the World War that was already raging in Europe, the patriotic and energetic 22-year-old proudly accepted an appointment as a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. December 7, 1941, and the attack on Pearl Harbor was just around the corner.
Our attitude is, well, I guess we go get those little sons of guns.
Only a few months later, despite Marine regulations, Jeff risked his commission and secretly married his lady fair. Within 2 months, the regulation barring such youthful military unions was rescinded. It was the beginning of Cooper's lifelong distaste for rules and regulations that came in conflict with common sense. He soon found himself assigned to the 35,000-ton battleship USS Pennsylvania as the junior officer of the 100-man Marine detachment on board. The Pennsy, as she was often called, fired more huge 14-inch main battery rounds at entrenched Japanese positions than any other ship in World War II.
He would use the word Jap or Nip in daily speech. But you have to understand that his generation came from a different culture, one in which they had been soundly insulted and attacked without provocation.
Jeff's various duties aboard the Pennsy often took him ashore to many of the recently captured but often still hostile South Pacific islands. It was on Kwajalein in early 1944 that now Captain Jeff Cooper would be involved in his first up-close and personal armed confrontation.
Yeah, Jeff mentioned to me about some of the episodes in World War II where he had to actually have conflicts with enemy soldiers. But he was saying that it's definitely a fear factor there you have to overcome. You have to be calm, and he was using a Colt single-action .45.
The incident on Kwajalein would be only the first of 3 deadly combat shootings that Cooper was involved in. Not surprisingly, in each case, Jeff came out on top. Like the consummate professional he was, Jeff Cooper was matter-of-fact about his deadly combat experiences.
You must decide that you're going to do it. That means you must be aggressive, you must be alert, and you have to be ruthless. You can't strike a light blow. According to Machiavelli, never strike your enemy a minor injury. If you're going to do anything, do it, and get it over with. And lastly, you keep your head. Stay cool. If you get excited, you lose.
A superior of Jeff's, a future Chief of Staff of the Marine Corps, once told him, there are two transcendent experiences in a man's life that surpass anything else he may have ever known. The first is when the one girl in the world says, yes, she will. And the second is when he stands on a hill, exhausted, bloody, hurting, covered with grime, with a gun in his hand, and watches strong, brave, armed men flee in terror from his presence. It was that calm under fire attitude that would eventually become part of the basics for Cooper's legendary common sense firearms courses. Another senior officer, Lieutenant General Victor Krulak, who commanded then Major Jeff Cooper in the South Pacific, described him as not accepting an idea at face value. He went after the facts. His greatest interest gradually became teaching, and he had a great flair for it. Jeff was not an ordinary man, not an ordinary Marine. With America's decisive victory ending World War II in August of 1945, Jeff soon found himself a military intelligence instructor at the Marine Corps Command and Staff College in Quantico, Virginia. He and Janelle were now the proud parents of two lively and pretty young daughters, Christy and Perry Cooper. The youngest daughter, Lindy, would come into the family 3 years later. Being parents was a job that Jeff and Janelle took very seriously.
My wife and I and our 3 children lived as a group, and we associated our ideas, and we talked about things, and we discussed the issues of the day. We talked about what they did at school and what they did with us.
The FBI's training academy was also located on the Marine Corps base at Quantico, and the Bureau's firing range was right below Jeff and Janelle's cozy quarters. Jeff soon unofficially audited and completed a number of the FBI's courses, most notably their Agent Shooting Course, using his 1911 A145 government Colt instead of the anemic .38 revolver then standard issue to all FBI agents.
Back in the real old days of the FBI, when after J. Edgar Hoover had taken over and cleaned it up, Hoover said to himself, where can I get my agents trained? And the nearest place that he could find was the Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia. So then Hoover, he said, there's still guys out there, old Western marshals, who know how to gunfight, the practical aspects of it. And he sent his agents out to find them. He said, you tell them they can become a special agent of the FBI, but they've got to set up a firearms training thing. We'll use Quantico, but I want these guys to do it. But each one of them has to have killed in single combat at least 6 men.
The FBI Academy at Quantico. I was not a regular student, but I was a guest at their state school. When I went down there, I preferred to use the service pistol, the 1911 .45, to the revolver that they were all using. They thought I was unfair. And yes, I know, it's a better gun than that gun. I can do anything you can do with that revolver and do it better with this. And not so much because I'm a better shot. I may be a better shot, but I have a better gun. And this annoyed them very much.
In later years, the FBI would eventually come around to Cooper's tried and true methods.
The FBI doctrine was that most gunfights are within 7 yards, 21 feet. And it would be a particular stance with the legs apart, but it would be one hand. And Jeff Cooper changed all that. He changed it to the two-hand Weaver stance, which I'm now informed the FBI employs these days.
The Korean War was in full and terrible swing. With his Stanford education, inquisitive nature, and now military intelligence background, Jeff soon found himself temporarily assigned to the fledgling CIA. It was part of his life that he felt honor-bound not to discuss.
Jeff's particular code of honor, so to speak, was such that if he, as he explained, if he signed a document that said, I'm not going to do so-and-so, then by God, he's not going to do so-and-so, no matter what has transpired over a 40-year period.
Much of his time with the CIA was spent in Thailand, organizing various covert operations that would make the Chinese divert troops from the war in Korea. Over 50 years later, Jeff's dangerous activities in Southeast Asia are still considered too sensitive to declassify. It was in Chiang Ri province in the backcountry that Cooper would be involved in his third close-up lethal confrontation. This shooting was related to the wild and violent nature of the criminal opium traders who controlled much of the area where his assignments for the CIA were taking place.
In a paramilitary situation, in this case in the Southeast Asian, this is a country where if you see somebody over there, you better know who he is, because people get hit without any warning at all.
The situation in Thailand involved an apparent enforcer for one of the warlords who wanted to send a message to the Farang Westerners to keep out of his territory. The assassin's 9mm Sten gun at 25 meters was no match for Cooper's skill with a .45. The semi-automatic 1911 .45 Colt had been invented to arm U.S. troops against fanatical Muslim warriors in the southern Philippines in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War. After this third armed confrontation, Jeff Cooper became convinced of the 1911 Colt's superiority as a combat firearm.
He used to talk about the 1911, and he used to say that Michelangelo said that the egg was the perfect shape. He says, well then, if the egg is the perfect shape, the 1911 is the perfect pistol. He said everything is where it should be. Every control, the balance, it is just the right size, it is the perfect caliber.
I would say it combines characteristics better than any other instrument of its type. It combines stopping power, compactness, ease of operation, ease of manufacture, handiness, unlike any other gun.
With the end of the Korean War, Jeff and Janelle and the girls settled into a middle-class officer's existence in Washington, awaiting further orders. In the early 1950s, amateur sports car racing was becoming all the rage. Jeff purchased a snazzy little MG and started competing in East Coast rallies that took place on local airstrips.
I love to drive fast. I think most people love to drive fast. It's a great thrill to get out there on a course and go just as fast as that car will take you on the edge of disaster is a great thrill. It's a kick in the pants.
But on the career front, the Marine Corps was going through some major peacetime changes, and Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Cooper soon found himself the victim of severe peacetime budget cuts in the military. Of the 400,000 Marines who were active duty in 1953, there would be available spots for only 95,000. Young light colonels like Cooper, who qualified for battalion strength commands, were not needed. Jeff soon went on inactive reserve status and found himself a civilian for the first time in 14 years.
A man leaves home in one state, he goes out, he slays dragons, and he comes back and he's changed. And I think that resonated with the colonel.
He has a great imagination, he has a great exuberance. He was destined for better things. And he tried a few civilian-type jobs that were not for him.
The Coopers soon traveled across country back to Los Angeles, but it was a city that had changed dramatically since the early days of World War II.
We didn't care for the public schools for our daughters in Los Angeles. So we moved up to Big Bear Lake, and we never regretted it. It was a place where Jeff could expand on his writing and pursuing his degree in history. doing teaching for the junior college that had an extension up there in Big Bear.
Completing his master's in history at the University of California, Riverside, introduced Jeff to a side of education the combat-tested Marine hadn't known existed.
Had in mind going for a doctorate in order to teach. I thought teaching at the university level would be a nice life, but I found out, no, it's not. The academic world is much too savage for me. I find that professional soldiers are very mild, gentle people compared to professors. I've never known hatred to be manifest so violently and so abstractedly as between academic types.
Yet Jeff Cooper found great themes of courage and conquest in his master's thesis on Hernando Cortez and the conquest of the Aztecs.
The idea that a man could set forth with 400 gentlemen adventurers and 200 maroon sailors in violation of his orders to conquer a community numbering somewhere between 6 million and 16 million people with nothing but what he had in his hands is a magnificence. He did it because God was on his side. People today are fond of excoriating the conquistador, being a brute who simply wanted gold and tortured the Indians and so on. Okay, you try it sometime. No, this is only a small part of the story. Certainly the conquistadors were brutal. They weren't probably as brutal as the Aztecs, but they were pretty brutal. I think that's off to one side. Heroism is a much bigger point, and this guy was something else. He achieved more with less than almost anybody in history.
In the late 1950s, television westerns and quick draw were all the rage. In order to promote Big Bear as a summer tourist destination, Jeff put on his promoter's hat and created a unique fast draw competition called the Leather Slap that drew on his previous military and FBI experiences. A much sought-after motion picture gun coach who has worked with top talent like Russell Crowe and Bruce Willis, Fel Reed was a boy wonder quick draw artist of only 14 when he first competed in the Leather Slap.
Jeff always treated me as an equal, like, as a man, although I wasn't one. But he always told me that age didn't make a lot of difference. It's how you conducted yourself. It was actually the last real gunfighting match I think they ever had. It was man against man. Each guy would stand and face his own target, and usually a 10 or 12-inch plate. We started out with whistles would blow, and you would draw and fire your weapon till you hit the target. And a judge would say which side won. Later on, they had electronic timing devices that would show the actual times.
It was at the Leather Slap events that Jeff really began to observe and formulate the basics for what would become known worldwide as the modern technique of the pistol.
He actually learned it through the laboratory method. He took a lot of young shooters who were very talented. In Big Bear, California, they would have the Big Bear leather slaps. So by watching these young shooters, observing them, seeing what they did right, seeing what they did wrong, he came to a body of knowledge that he later translated into what is still today taught at Gunsight, which is the modern pistol technique.
Eldon Carl and Jack Weaver and Fel Reed, and he took all these people and he brought them together. And he had the foresight and the intelligence to ask each of them, what could they contribute? And one individual, his draw was very, very quick. Another individual had consistency in when he struck something. Another individual seemed to press the trigger faster. And he took all these elements and started combining them.
Well, safety was always paramount with Jeff's shooting because we were moving with guns all the time. Never had any accidents. Everything was completely safe because he set it up that way. Jeff would show us, finger out of the trigger guard, where to keep your thumb and stuff like that, how to hold the gun when you're moving and running. And we learned a lot from Jeff.
Jeff codified the basic safety rules of firearms handling, and he taught those rules, and he was able to explain why each of those rules was important.
All guns are always loaded. Never point the muzzle at anything you don't want to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are on the target and you're ready to shoot. Know your target and what's behind it and around it. Very simple. Lawyers want to put 400 rules on there.
It is a fact of human psychology and how the brain is wired that your ability to memorize things in a stressful situation is limited by short-term memory. There are simply limits to what you can handle simultaneously. 4 is much easier to memorize than 10.
This was also the beginning of what would eventually evolve into the unofficial Jeff Cooper social gatherings, where stories of past heroes and current events were shared, discussed, and relished.
We used to meet at his fireplace at night. A lot of us would stay at his house. We'd sit around and have a few, maybe a glass of wine or maybe a beer once in a while for me. And we'd be able to talk about the Old West, honor, 300 Spartans, everything, Marines, the whole bit.
In the mid-1960s, Jeff began to bring together all of his practical combat shooting observations and experiences by writing and publishing well-thought-out articles in widely read firearms magazines like Guns and Ammo. Individuals living and working under potentially dangerous circumstances from Central America to Africa began to take notice and contract with Cooper for private instruction. His experiences also led him to perhaps his best-known book, The Principles of Personal Defense, first published by Colonel Robert K. Brown of Soldier of Fortune magazine.
And that particular publication is also indicative of what I think Jeff will be long known for, certainly one of the most important things, and that is the mindset of the individual that is going to get involved in a confrontational situation with firearms, or even hand-to-hand, alertness, how to respond, etc., being aware. And once again, this is something even the military really had not focused on.
What Jeff did with the coding is something that we all need to learn, is that there are clearly different environments. And if you're observant and can detect those environments changing, then you yourself should change with them to a degree.
The first was condition white, and I would call that like being an idiot, walking around having no knowledge of where you are, what's around you, and not much caring. Well, you're going to get in trouble that way. And he was yellow, and that was you're relaxed, but you're aware. You're aware of your surroundings. The next color, maybe orange, that was something catches your attention. You know, I don't know, something not quite right here. I better focus on that. And I think the next one was red. We're in trouble. We got to take care of this problem, and I have to shoot this guy.
It was how to think about your environment, how to carry yourself, how to conduct your life in a safe fashion. And that was far more valuable than the actual skills, the physical skills of handling a firearm. As Jeff was fond of saying, most shooting problems are relatively simple. What is difficult is avoiding them in the first place, or recognizing them when they happen and knowing what to do when it happens.
Cooper's Principles of Personal Defense is still in print almost 40 years after its initial publication. Police officers and combat troops worldwide now follow these simple but effective principles every day.
Jeff was a master at taking something that was very complex, very ethereal, very theoretical, and breaking it down so that you could read it one time and go, I've got it. And that's the only way you could get through shifts. That's the only way that you could survive as a police officer. Yeah, you had to have Jeff in your hip pocket. And that's what he did for us with his Principles of Personal Self-Defense.
While Jeff Cooper is best known for his major contributions to modern firearms training, there were many other sides to this man of many parts.
History is everything that ever happened, from what happened yesterday back to the Old Testament. And so if you can find a place that's dull, it's hard to do. The only reason you can find a dull spot in history is because people didn't write it down. History doesn't matter if you don't write it down. If you don't write it down, it didn't exist. History being a grand adventure, you have to jump around and pick out which adventures take your fancy.
Teddy Roosevelt and his exploits as a Rough Rider commanding the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry at San Juan and Kettle Hills in Cuba. I think those fascinated him a great deal.
The colonel also appreciated the spirit of Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt has been called the last great public man on horseback in America.
He was a diversified man, a man who overcame physical disability. He was sort of scrawny, and he had bad eyes, and he was troubled by asthma. All these things were handicaps for a young man. He overrode them and became a hero in all respects. He carried off the Spanish-American War thing with aplomb and became one of the few American presidents whom it would be a pleasure to have as a dinner guest.
Winston Churchill was another man of action and letters who fascinated Cooper.
So the nice thing about Churchill, in addition to being a diversified man who did everything well, from playing polo to commanding troops, was that he wrote his experiences down. A man who not only made history, but wrote it down so we'd know what it was like. And consequently, I feel very strongly about this. If you have anything to say, don't be bashful. Write it down. It may not be very well written, but we want to know what happened.
Cooper was equally fascinated by two other Churchill contemporaries who also fought in the bloody and contentious Boer War in southern Africa at the end of the 19th century, but on opposing sides. Deneys Reitz was a young Boer citizen soldier fighting against Churchill's British Empire in 1899. Reitz also published a book about his experiences.
Deneys Reitz was a young man of 17 at the beginning of the Boer War. And when they went to war, the leader was Paul Kruger. Deneys. I was introduced to the man. He said, "Sir, I want to go fight the British." And Paul Kruger is supposed to have said, "Young man, they tell us that the British outnumber us 3-1. Do you think you can take care of 3 Britishers?" And he said, "Sir, if I can get them in a line, I can take 3 of them with one shot." And he said, "Give the boy a rifle. He's our man."
Frederick Russell Burnham was a fellow Southern Californian who had served in the Apache Wars of the 1880s, prospected for gold in Mexico, fought Matabele tribesmen during the settling of Rhodesia in Africa, and was a chief scout for the British during the Boer War.
Jeff certainly was a great admirer of Frederick Burnham. He always mentioned him on his short list of books that everyone should read was Burnham's autobiography about his adventures. And there are interesting parallels. Jeff also admired the fact that Burnham got it down on paper, that he wrote so well, and he recorded his experiences just as Jeff later would.
Jeff's knowledge and passionate appreciation of history also gave him a well-reasoned and unwavering basis for his firm stand on freedom and the Second Amendment, as well as an American's right to personally possess firearms.
It isn't that freedom and liberty means you have the right to do everything that you want to do just because it makes you feel good. He would take it all the way back to Blackstone and say, understand completely how this Bill of Rights and how this Constitution came to be.
And one of the things that Colonel Cooper and I discussed was the way they used the language in there. They did not say that in this Constitution we give our citizens the right to keep and bear arms. That's not what they said. They said the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does that mean? It means you already had it. That's a God-given right. That's one of the unalienable rights that they were speaking of. It's something you get from God as a free person. And he understood that.
When the Colonel talks about the Second Amendment, he would talk about it in many different lights. If you talk about the Second Amendment solely in terms of English construction, it's very clear you have 2 clauses. One, a subordinate clause, and the main clause in that is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Notice that the right of the people to keep and bear arms pre-exists. It is not granted by a government. It is not a boon given to us by bureaucrats. It's not a political favor that can be handed out and taken back like candy. No, it is one of those things that stems from those inalienable rights that are granted by our Creator. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we have the right to defend our lives. And that is where it comes from, and that is inherent in every individual human being.
He knew exactly where he would be, and he kept bringing us back to the few basics that are believed and understood to be a civil right under our Constitution, and that it should not be reclassified by anyone as a different kind of right. As
George Washington put it, personal firearms are liberty's teeth. they enforce the freedom of the citizen against the government. Our entire governmental situation, encapsulated in the Bill of Rights, emphasizes that the people are the last analysis. The people are the last authority. The government is their servant. The Bill of Rights makes the government the servant of the people. They will remain the servant of the people as long as the people are armed. As long as the people are armed, they will remain the people's servant. That's the reason we regard the matter very seriously.
A lot of people outside the shooting sports and the shooting culture and the Second Amendment advocacies forget that Cooper wasn't just about the Second Amendment. He was about all of them. And I became more sensitive to the entire Bill of Rights through his writing and his casual conversation.
Jeff Cooper respected self-reliance and courage, attributes he felt were increasingly in short supply and under attack in modern times.
Jeff Cooper always said you can't defeat evil by running away from it. And that's something that in these changing times when people are tossing away the important things of our heritage, Jeff Cooper sticks with you.
You only have a certain amount of time, and you may not make it to sundown today. That goes for both you and me. So the ability to look at that fact in the face and laugh is courage. And the great men can do that. Laughter in the face of disaster. So a person who is prepared to protect his family, protect his house, protect himself, to act as a free man openly in society, not a hostile, but simply a man who looks out for his own activities, doesn't call 911, he handles his own problems, feels a sense of security, serenity, which the man who doesn't lacks. So the person who is disarmed or unarmed is automatically going to envy the person who is armed.
Jeff Cooper knew that firearms in private citizens' hands were not there just to keep the government in line. They could also be a passionate avocation as well as an undisputed right, as shooting sports had always been for him for much of his adult life.
Shooting is fun. This is something a lot of people don't understand, especially in a so-called male-dominated society. A lot of women don't know that it's fun. Correspondents, news people, don't seem to realize that it's fun. They come down to visit and say, why do you do this? Here, take this, I'll show you something. They say, hey, this is fun. Yeah, it is. It never occurred to me to separate the pleasures of shooting sports by gender. I figured if I didn't show my children how to enjoy life, I would be abusing them. And that would be true of shooting. If I don't show them how to swim, I'm abusing them. If I don't show them how to appreciate good music, I'm abusing them. So we made it possible for all of our children to shoot when they wanted to, but we never pushed it. You should never require your child to learn to shoot. Hunting is valuable to the extent that it involves danger. To get to dangerous game, well, there are several kinds. They're not easy to get to, but they're there.
The Colonel was a great admirer of Jose Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher. And he urged people to read Ortega y Gasset's Meditations on Hunting. Both the Colonel and Ortega y Gasset were aficionados of bullfighting, of toreo. And here is something where the Colonel's sense of aesthetics comes in. Bullfighting is not simply going out and killing a bull. Toreo, bullfighting, is about a man being a man and a bull being a bull. Men dominate the animals, but we can't make it too unfair. It's the same way with hunting. You can't simply just go out and slaughter animals. That's not the point.
Some cruelty is somewhat unnecessary. Some is too mercenary, but it's just incidental. It's not the issue. The issue is courage. Courage is more important than cruelty. I am fond of the bulls, the corrida, the bullfight. Now that turns most Anglos off. Most Anglos turn green when you talk about bullfights. Okay, I'm not going to object to that. They don't have to go to bullfights. But I do when I can, although it's hard to do unless you live in Mexico or Spain. But the idea of courage is more manifest there than almost any place you can see on demand. Courage in the face of death. A great matador plays with his own life in a matter of inches, and he does it again and again and again. He has studied this bull. He knows his reactions. So he looks at the crowd. He takes his handkerchief out, throws it on the ground. He plants his 2 feet on the handkerchief like that. Raises his sword, this hand. We'll lay it in that hand. Over there. He said, all right. The bull charges. He drops the point between the shoulder blades, and the point goes in, bang against his hand. The bull lands out there on his nose, dead. It's called recibiendo. This only happens rarely. This is like a little bit more than, say, a home run with the bases loaded. It's more unlikely than that. And besides, death is not the issue in baseball. It is in the bullfight. I think this is magnificent. Most people say, hey, but it's all bloody. You're torturing the bull. Okay, but I'm more interested in courage than I am in cruelty.
The Colonel applied that aesthetic to hunting as well. I mean, don't stand off with a rifle and shoot something 400 yards away. Get in close. Now, the Colonel could make a shot like that. There are a lot of people who can, some of us who can. But to him, track the animal, learn the animal, get close to the animal. Do it the right way. Allow the animal a chance to escape.
There are people who claim that hunting is in some way immoral. I can spit that out the window with no trouble at all because it's not. Man is a carnivorous predator. Look at his teeth. Those teeth are carnivorous teeth. He's a meat eater. And that's the way God created him. If you don't like that, you don't have to eat meat. We do not damage the environment in case they're worried about that. And as a matter of fact, as most people know, it's only the hunters who have made possible the burgeoning of game animals in the country. We have more game in this country now than we had when the Pilgrims landed because of hunters. Inflicting death upon another living creature is a negative to some people, but not to everyone, and it's not their business to tell us how we should act.
Like many experienced African hunters, Jeff Cooper considered stalking the tenacious and aggressive Cape buffalo the ultimate hunting experience.
The risk involved is certainly a large component. Here's something that you have to do properly, because if you didn't, you might get killed.
On his 70th birthday, Jeff Cooper did something on a Cape buffalo hunt that other hunters can only dream about.
Here he goes to Africa to hunt Cape buffalo, which is always thrilling. And he's out there on his 70th birthday. And he's got Baby, his big 460 G&A, his heavy rifle. This will lay low the mightiest beast on earth, particularly in Jeff Cooper's hands. And he goes out and he finds the buffalo, and the buffalo is in the high grass. Of course, you have to make a shot on the buffalo just right. You really don't want to wound one and have it get into the bush. It's just not a pleasant afternoon. So the buffalo is there, and it looks at him, and Jeff raises Baby. He puts the sights right on the right spot, heart-lung shot. And he presses the trigger, and boom! Baby roars, and the buffalo goes down. And while the rifle's in recoil, still in his shoulder, he jacks another shell into the chamber, because with a buffalo, you can't take a chance. And as the rifle comes back down, the buffalo stands up. And the colonel must have wondered, what manner of beast is this that can take a blow from such a mighty weapon and just pop back on its feet? And he fires again, and the buffalo goes down. He tops off Baby and goes up to see. And there are two buffalo. There were two buffaloes. One was lying down, and another one stood up. He shot that one and laid it low, and the one behind it stood up, and he laid that low. He gets a double on buffalo on his 70th birthday. I mean, is that cool or what?
The kind of Hemingway-esque adventurous spirit that would keep Jeff Cooper coming back to Africa, even in his 70s, contributed greatly to his writing of over a dozen books. His legions of devoted readers were surprised at the wide range of subjects that Cooper's books often touched upon.
He had such a respect for the truth and for exactitude. And in his writing, his grammar was always perfect. There was also an exactness in what he said, that when Jeff Cooper described something, you knew that it was exactly true to the best of his ability to recall it and describe it.
The broad spectrum of knowledge is just truly fascinating, and his knowledge of history. And it was truly a joy to sit down and simply listen to him. Not that he lectured, but it was truly quite awesome.
Jeff Cooper also never had a problem expressing his opinions in public writing forums as well.
I began reading National Review and saw letters to National Review from Jeff Cooper, which impressed me greatly. Well, these were just letters to William F. Buckley. He used to respond personally, and Jeff might take him to task on the use of a certain word or his characterization of a historical incident. But Buckley was impressed enough with his letters to publish them and respond.
Jeff Cooper was a pain in the ass sometimes. He was very prickly. I'm saying that in not a denigrating manner, but I would suggest as a friendly way. But he was very picky, and Jeff was very dogmatic. But he had an insight and the capability of going underneath the headlines and really get a feeling for what the facts of the case were, so to speak.
Storytellers do like each other. You know, what they don't like are bad storytellers, you know, and he had the same quality that I do. When someone was telling a story badly, you sit there and say, is this going to be a long story? Because if it is, please shut up, because you're not really good at this.
This gun writer and Marine Corps colonel was as big a fan of The Lord of the Rings as I was, perhaps even bigger. And he saw it as a combination of a wonderful myth, illustrating the battle between good and evil. But I think he also just admired Tolkien's genius as a writer and as a stylist so much that it was a great pleasure to him to read it.
Jeff Cooper was one of those rare individuals who was truly larger than life. There are specific stories about him that have become part of his personal legend.
One of the great stories about Jeff was that Bob Peterson was having lunch with him at Scandia, the restaurant Peterson owned, and Peterson sat down on his left side. And he said, why are you sitting on my left side? He said, I want you on my right side. He says, why? He says, because if somebody comes in here, Jeff, and something erupts, you know, some shooting incident erupts, I don't want your empties in my salad. And Jeff very sternly thought about it and said, that's good thinking, Pete, that's good thinking.
Mike Dillon came to Gunsight for the first time, was brought here by a friend of his to meet Jeff Cooper. And Mike was very interested in what Jeff was carrying, so he said to him, he says, I'd like to see your personal weapon. And Jeff was wearing his .45 cocked and locked, condition 1 on his hip. And Jeff says, you want to see my personal firearm? And Mike says, yeah, I'd like to see what it looked like. So Jeff took it out of the holster, laid it on the desk, still loaded, cocked and locked, with the muzzle pointed in the safe direction. Then he opened the drawer in front of him where he had another .45, made sure it was loaded with a round in the chamber, put that in his holster. Then he proceeded to unload the gun he'd started with that was now on the desk, and then he handed it to Mike for Mike's inspection, which is classic Jeff Cooper. Never be without a loaded gun ready to fire on your hip.
Yet this man of action had quiet, reflective moments that revealed another side to his spirit and soul.
It was an experience in the Pacific when he was standing on the bow of Pennsylvania, his ship. And in the midst of the war and all the difficulties, he saw a flying fish arcing out of the water ahead of the bow. And he said he was just swept away by the beauty of it. He was filled with a kind of a rapture at what a beautiful sight this was. It just washed everything else out of his mind.
For Jeff Cooper, life held unlimited possibilities, some of which he never set out consciously to pursue.
My life just happened to me. I didn't do it on purpose. What enabled it was a tremendous lot of luck, enormous luck. So much luck that, well, it can't be explained except by divine intervention.
Jeff Cooper's legacy of self-defense and situational awareness lives on through Gunsight and the thousands of successful students who have completed instruction on its ranges. Many military, police, and civilian instructors themselves have passed on Cooper's modern technique to literally hundreds of thousands of shooters worldwide.
Well, Jeff Cooper is to the firearms training what John Browning was to the modern semi-automatic pistol, or Henry Ford was to the automobile industry.
Well, a couple of months ago, I was down at Fort Sam Houston, where they train medics for the United States Army. Almost every soldier that was carrying an M16 with his hand on the pistol grip and his finger straight along the side of the weapon above the trigger guard, exactly the way Jeff taught me to handle either a rifle or a pistol way back in 1979 and in the 1980s at Gunsight. And I thought that was a testament to how widely his teachings have permeated what we do in the military and in the police forces today.
I often in class point out one student of mine I had who has the highest score of anybody I ever taught. And he was attacked by 5 goblins of various types. The head man had a Kalashnikov assault rifle. The others had various other things, several firearms and edge weapons, 5 of them. He had himself his 1911 pistol with 8 rounds in it. He put 5 on the ground, 4 dead on the scene, 1 on the way to the hospital. He did that with 1 pistol with what was in it. So he was a star student. Whatever he learned from me, he learned it well.
I don't know that I can name it by country, but what happens a lot of times is I'll be wearing the Gunsight Raven on a shirt or a baseball cap, or I have a little gold pendant that's got the Gunsight Raven on it, and people will stop and say, "You've been to Gunsight." They might be Austrians, or they might be Germans, or they might be Swiss, or people from England or Australia or New Zealand. And when they hear I live in Arizona, that's their first question is, "Have you been to Gunsight?" They don't ask me if I've been to the Grand Canyon, they ask me if I've been to Gunsight.
Perhaps no more fitting tribute could be paid to this modern guru of the pistol than the one which occurred at the 2005 SHOT Show.
I was wearing the SWAT pin, which I'm wearing now. And this is the round SWAT pin, which is not like the other SWAT pin. This is the pin you have to earn when you have been in a unit that demands so much out of you. It is a real honor to get this. It can't be bought, it can't be purchased. It is something that you absolutely have to earn. And at the time, talking to Jeff, I looked down at him. I took off the pin, and I asked his wife, Janelle, if she would pin it on him as a token of appreciation from all of us in LAPD SWAT. And she leaned over to Jeff and spoke to him, and she relayed the fact that he wished that I would pin it on, which I did. I knelt down and pinned it on, and Jeff knew what it was. And he looked at me and said, "Thank you, well, now it's official." And, well, in essence, it's always been official.
Bernard of Chartres said 1,000 years ago, "We see more because we are as dwarves standing on the shoulders of giants." And an awful lot of people climbed up on Jeff Cooper's shoulders, and we've seen a lot farther because of that. What of Jeff Cooper? To use Tom Wolfe's phrase, he was a man in full.